Welcome to Behind the Brief, the podcast where we go beyond the buzzwords and into the real stories behind great marketing and leadership. We talk a lot on this show about strategy, frameworks, and the big shiny launches, but there's a whole layer underneath that doesn't get talked enough about, and that is messaging that's been almost finalized for months, the customer story getting stuck in a Google document, and the project sitting somewhere between idea and execution. That messy, unglamorous middle is where most of our real work happens. And my guest today has built an entire practice around helping teams get that work unstuck and out the door. Maylee Jacob is a fractional marketer who helps teams figure out what their marketing should actually be doing. That helps get the work right out the door. She's often brought in when the foundation is unclear or the work is half built and the teams need someone senior enough to connect the pieces. So welcome to my show, Maylee. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So excited to be here. What an intro.
Yeah, right. I know I did give a little bit of intro, but can you talk a little bit about yourself, a little bit of intro to people who do not know you yet?
Yeah, I mean, you covered most of the bases, but as a quick add-on, so I've been working in marketing for the last 15 years, which makes me feel old when I say that number out loud. And I've had like quite the journey. I started in CPG and I went into e-commerce and then into tech. And so I feel like I've run the gamut of the different types of worlds that you can work in marketing. And I've learned over the years, like I'm super passionate about digging beyond kind of like the surface level stuff and figuring out what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve and how do we solve that, and like bringing marketing into more of the conversation beyond being that afterthought that people kind of throw on the table when, they're not getting the leads or whatever, right? Bringing into more of the business strategy conversation. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today and chat with you about all things of my journey and my opinions because I always have lots.
Glad that we're doing it today. And in this episode, we are definitely going to be covering Maylee's career journey, what her fractional product marketing actually looks like day to day, and the difference between moving fast and just being busy. And my favorite kind of question, what's been the most rewarding part of it all? So Maylee, let's get into it. And first of all, I just want to start from the very beginning, how you got there. Like, can you take me back to where you have worked across SaaS, e-commerce, DTC, consumer brands, and you have led teams and worked inside of them. So what's the actual path that led you to marketing in the first place and then to deciding is fractional the way you wanted to work?
Yeah, so I'll give you the totally like real answer on that. I remember going into university or college as they will call it in the US, and I was like, I'm not going to be a doctor. And so automatically it was like, I guess I'm going to business school. So I went into business school. I was not a really great numbers person. Took some marketing courses, really got into it. And I was like, okay, marketing feels like my jam. I feel like this is an area that I understand, that it seems fun, all of those things. And that's where I stayed. There are definitely many days that I'm like, oh my gosh, would have just been easier, in the long term if I was some sort of doctor or something, but it sounds like a very tiring life to live. So yeah, so that was literally my decision point. It wasn't based on a lot of stuff. It was like, I'm not going to do this. I feel like I'm going to go into this world. I'm going to find what I like here, and then I will figure out my life from there.
Love that. I also started my career, but I wanted to be a professor of English literature. But I'm glad I chose the other direction. I want to shift our conversation to marketing a little bit, but the messy ones. So is there a marketing moment from earlier in your career that forced you to rethink what good work actually takes?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there was one role in particular that got me really out of my comfort zone. Like I had worked somewhere for a long number of years, and after a while you get pretty comfortable. And I took a job that was a bit of a leap of faith, or like a little outside of my comfort zone, and ended up going somewhere that like didn't really have a marketing foundation to it. It was very messy. There was not a lot of trust or understanding of the role that marketing played in the business. And, it wasn't a perfect place to work, but it was really interesting for me to go into that world and try and figure out, hey, like, how do I connect these dots? How do I show these people that this matter? How do we frame the wins that we're making?
Right.
And also was going in and leading a big team too. And like at the time, I was very fascinated by leading teams, and I thought that was so cool. And so on the front of being a leader too, it also stretched me in that way. And I was like, okay, I'm really good at doing this. That's not really where my head is at these days now, but it was something that I really enjoyed. And that whole adventure, a lot of learnings and takeaways that I then took into the next part of my career, which is when I ended up in tech. But that was for sure the biggest turning point for me, that I was like, I love the challenge of this. And I think about that now, kind of being the fractional side of things, is like, what things from the career or the stuff that I've done in the past did I really like doing and why? And for me, that was one thing that I come back to. Like, it was a clarity, like it was a messy thing. There was a lot of stuff to figure out, foundation to put in place, getting people aligned. Like, that is always a tricky piece of it. But once you can kind of nail that and you start seeing what comes when all of those pieces actually fit together and have some sort of actual leader or strategy at the top, like it's such a game changer, in my opinion.
Moving on to this is specifically my favorite part that I want to ask you is you have mentioned this on your website that I keep thinking about, that you often end up picking up the half-built thing everyone agrees matters, but nobody has time to finish. So can you walk me through what that actually looks like? And is there a example of what half thing built you've been handed in your previous experiences or professional, journey as a marketer?
Yeah, totally. I feel like a lot of teams these days are they're moving super fast and they're just producing like a lot of motion and stuff. And so, there's many teams are busy. People are, trying to drive all of these different wins, and like a lot of stuff that leads to some of the marketing successes gets pushed to the side because there's no time or there's no the priorities are different or whatever it is. So like when things are working in isolation like that, like having somebody that can come in and kind of pick up the pieces and without a lot of hand holding, I think a lot of the stuff that I've done in that space so far has leaned into content, to be honest. I've helped a lot of companies that have these big content goals. And part of that might be because the age of AI and everyone's turning out stuff and they're trying to write stuff. But a lot of the companies I've worked for are thinking about it differently than just like, let's put out a million different blogs. That's been something that I've come in and say, hey, okay, you need this content stuff written. You have the briefs. I'll write the content. You don't need to handhold me. I'll deliver your final work.
Right.
I've also done it with customer marketing foundational stuff. So, I've done a mat leave the last summer where I got to take over for somebody that was going on maternity leave and kind of come into her role. And she was still newish to her role when she joined. And so there's a lot of foundational work that had to be done in time to meet up with this big customer conference that they did every year. So that was another like coming in, things were kind of messy. This person came in, they were like starting to get things fleshed out, but they were going on maternity leave. They needed someone to come in, pick up the pieces, put together a plan, get buy-in, work it, like build these relationships with other people, build relationships with customers. So I see a lot of it all the time. There's other thing, people have all these webinar dreams that they need to bring to life, but they don't have the capacity to do all of the pieces involved, right? There's like stuff like that I can come and I can help with, or there's such a wide variety of things, and just like teams just have a million things to do. Teams are getting smaller, people are being laid off, but there's still work that has to get done. So how do you have somebody come in that isn't going to be an extra person that you have to handhold to do these things?
Well, that's actually very interesting. And since you already mentioned that the person you had to build and do the foundational work, right? So like, what does that look like? And how do you slot into a team as someone senior without becoming another person to manage? Like, that's something that I think almost every one of us has felt in their marketing careers. But, you don't want to burden on the team, but you also want to deliver senior and executive level work. So what would that be in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's funny because like to me, fractional marketing means stepping into work that already matters, but just like hasn't been owned. And so a good fractional person is somebody that has that experience behind them. Come in and, yes, oftentimes maybe their rate is a little bit more, but you are paying to bring somebody in that you can trust. Like they have the experience, they have the knowledge, they have the background to come in, figure stuff out. So like usually there's something that's already there. So whether it's like internal knowledge or rough drafts or customer conversations or call notes or SME, understands value, whatever it is, but it just like it hasn't been translated into something clear and useful yet, right? So it's not that a fresh person come in and just like write the asset as an example, right? Of course, I can come in, I can write an asset. Sure, many people do that, right? But it's that I can come in, I can understand context quickly. I have enough experience behind me, enough confidence behind me. I know how to ask the right questions. I know how to do the work. I can look for disconnects. I can look for gaps. And then I can figure out what the work actually has to do. So I'm not going to come to you necessarily with a list of a million questions. There naturally might be questions that come up when I'm trying to figure stuff out, but I'm going to come to you with like, here's the problem I see and here's the solution that I'm suggesting, right? I think that's the difference between hiring somebody fractionally to come and pick these pieces up and like what you're getting when you are, paying a little bit more for somebody to come in and do this work. Is the difference between somebody that comes to you and says, here's a problem I recognize, or here's an opportunity I see, here's what I want to do next. And like, are not necessarily saying, hey, what do you want me to do with this, right? So I think fractional honestly works best when there's enough trust and enough access to context. Like you can only do so much with the information that you have, right? I've seen that too, where you're working with half-baked information and then you can get a half-baked result, right? So if you want that strategic work, you want somebody to come in and not be handheld and do all these things, you can't just, you have to actually give them beyond just like task level access, let them ask the questions, let them take it on, let them own it. Because you don't want to just hire somebody for judgment and then you're just there being an instruction giver, right? That's not really the purpose of what they're doing.
Yeah, you would want the person you're bringing as a fractional to just get started from day one, right? And you do not have to spend a lot of time training them. Then what's the difference between a full-time and a fractional? So I think that's the whole thing. I think most of the people mix it up, but you made it pretty clear. So I really love that approach.
Yeah, and like I'll sum it up to like being a mom. I'm very in tune with mental load idea, right? You don't want somebody that's going to come in and then increase your mental load. You're wanting somebody to come in that's going to take things off your plate that you're not even realizing are things that like need to be taken off your plate or that have been sitting on your shoulders, right? So that's the biggest piece.
Yeah, I think if you end up doing a lot of the work, then it just makes you question like, why do you have a fractional person on your team? So
yeah, it's collaboration is going to be your best win in those senses. Like there always has to be some collaboration sense. There has to be a sense of trust. You can't do something if you don't trust the person that you've hired. If that's the case, then you should hire them, right? Or you need to go kind of like back to the drawing board on that.
I love that because if anybody who's listening us today is either, looking forward to switch from a full-time to a fractional, I think these are the kind of mindset or, skills that you've got to inbuild just to, do the practice yourself as a fractional, or at least people who want to hire a fractional, they get to understand that you don't have to do the work. The fractional person brings in all the expertise with them to actually offload your work. So I think that's the kind of mindset that we all need to really be aware of.
Yeah, totally. And as kind of like a side note to that one, I think too that being fractional or going that route is not for everybody. There are many people that maybe don't have like the backbone or, like I'm very direct. I am very to the point. I am not going to sugarcoat stuff. I have no problem following up with people. I have no problem trying to get my voice out, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't mind doing the admin stuff. I'm very type A. So it's very like in my wheelhouse. I love to make a spreadsheet. Give me a reason to make a spreadsheet. I'll do it. And I'm like, I've currently been playing around with Coda because I'm part of like the superhuman community, whatever that word is. Yeah. And I was like, I should try playing around with Coda. Like, I've never used it. So I'm trying to use stuff in there, but like, give me a reason to put something into a template and like track stuff and I'm all for it. Right. So.
Can you talk a little bit about Coda? Because maybe not many people know about it, or we can like take this towards the end of the show and you can tell people what you've actually been experimenting with the AI tools.
Yeah, we can talk about it now. I honestly haven't been doing anything crazy, but I've basically been rebuilding my spreadsheets that I typically put in Google Sheets and trying to use them in Coda. So I've always had this weird fascination with Notion. So I've never like Notion also to me is such a mind boggle. Like I've played around with it, but I've never really figured out how to use it. And every time I do, I feel like overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
So Coda has a lot of similarities to Notion in some senses, but I haven't gotten overly complicated on that yet, to be totally honest. It's like a super straightforward sheet. I'm just trying to play around and see how I can get things to work together and potentially build some stuff. So work in progress. I don't know if anyone finds that super helpful, but that's the real talk on how I'm using it right now.
I used to use Notion a lot, but then with all the AI integrations and the new features that they have added, like it's kind of becoming less habitual of a product to
Mm.
me. And I've just moved on to just pen and paper for now because I'm kind of done with the
I
AI
feel like
tools
that's the
and
opposite effect that they want to have, because you would think all those like AI integrations and stuff, they're trying to get people to be more
I
ingrained, right?
know.
So it's interesting that it's having like it makes it feel like there's too many things that you could do, and
Yes,
then it becomes overwhelming. Like
exactly.
I've always been with Notion, so I get
No,
that.
that's true. I think it's for me right now, I want everything very minimalistic because I am so overly stimulated these days with the AI tools, the workflows that I've built for myself. I'm like, where is me kind of losing myself in it? So I'm just back to pen and paper. This has to happen so that I can come up with better ideas.
You're not the first person that's made that comment to me lately. I've heard that from a few people that are like, I'm going back to pen and paper because I've given
Yeah.
up on all of this AI stuff.
Frankly, I've not given up, but I kind of feel the need to take a break from it because I have been doing it day in and out. Like I've been using a lot of Claude workflows. I've automated a lot of my manual tasks. It runs 9 a.m. in the morning, but I still need to do something. That creative spark, I don't want to lose it. That's why I'm back to my pen and paper. It's right here. So I keep taking notes here. I need it for my sanity as well for at least some time.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I get that.
So moving on to a very, different question. Like I want to focus this one particularly on the difference between moving quickly with a plan and staying busy. So one actually kind of builds a pipeline and the other clutters a project tool. I think that's what something that we were discussing about right now. But
Yeah.
the teams who end up with three agencies, two freelancers, and no clear picture of what any of it is doing today. Do you think this is a direction problem or it's like a vendor problem?
I think it's a direction problem. I don't think it's a vendor problem. I think companies can have a lot of vendors, sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is bad. I think the issue is that when nobody owns the direction, that's where it becomes a problem, right? So you can have an agency, you can have a freelancer, you can have a content person, you can have a paid media person. And honestly, a lot of smaller, like earlier stage companies end up going that route. And
Yeah.
again, but they can all be doing good work in isolation, right? But if nobody's asking what we're actually trying to make true in the business, then you're going to end up with like just a lot of movement and things not working together and no understanding of what is working and what isn't working. And, you can I've heard this a few times and I've walked into it where it's like, oh, we have an agency that's doing paid media and all we're getting is a spreadsheet that has a bunch of numbers on it. And, they're quick to take wins when they happen, but when something isn't working, they're, not going to give a lot of context, right? And it's not super uncommon. So when you have somebody that can understand, they don't have to be an expert in it. They don't have to be an expert in paid media, for example, but they know how to ask the right questions. They have enough visibility and understanding on this stuff to ask those questions and to link it with the broader strategy and the business goal. Then everything starts working better, right? You don't get a lot of value when you've got one person doing this siloed and another person doing this siloed, and you're fascinated only on these certain, like there has to be a bigger picture to it.
No, that's completely true. And like when you actually walk into that kind of fog, like is there a playbook or, a step by step that you follow to add some direction into this kind of messy middle?
I stay away from using the term playbook. If I had one, I feel like I should sell it on Gumroad. But for me, again, like I'm a person that's going to come in and I go in with I'm an outsider's eye to what you have. And then outsider's eye is always going to have different perspectives. They haven't drank that juice, let's say that term, and they can see things more clearly. They know what questions to ask. So it is literally going, let's call it an audit for lack of a better word, looking at all of the pieces. What is everything that you've been doing? Okay. Where are your strongest opportunities? What is performing the best? How are you measuring success? Who is your customer? Who is your best customer? I've seen that too, right? Like, especially if you go into, a services-based business or something outside of tech, super old school. You ask them who is your best customer and they give you some answer that's super generic. And it's like, oh, well, or like, why did customers choose us? Like, oh, well, because we do great work. Okay. cool. So does that person over there, right? So it's like it's asking those more specific and drill down questions so that you can get a base understanding of what makes the most sense to start fixing first. Because you cannot go into something like that and immediately cut all these things and do all these different changes because like that's not going to go over well either. It's taking what you can figure out from interviews, the conversations, the data, and then putting together a plan of like where can you start winning more first and building from there. That's my take on it. So like maybe that's a playbook in theory, but I
would ultimately call it a playbook, but if we do, then I think half of the marketer in us would really love to sell it on Gumroad. That's what you said.
I would love to make a passive income. It seems so easy on the internet with all those ads I get all the time.
Exactly. And all you need is just a laptop, right? So we have
just a laptop and an Etsy store and
oh my God. Yeah. Right.
they make it look so easy.
Exactly. And it's like almost every other small business or a small creator on YouTube is selling that idea of that playbook, but I don't think that works. I think that the only thing that's working is that idea of work. But okay, coming back to our main topic, like we talk about messaging, positioning, customer marketing. So how do you create clarity for a company that's still figuring out what it is, and how do you get a team aligned on what actually makes them different and why the customer story so often never gets shipped?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is kind of like going back to what I was saying before, but I think there's a difference. Like you don't need perfect clarity. And what you do need is like you need useful clarity. So it is giving your team enough shared understanding to make better decisions now than they did before. That's how I would sum it up. So, companies often wait for perfect clarity before they start writing stuff down, before they start perfecting it. And like, we're all guilty of that to some degree. Okay. I'm not saying that I automatically don't do that for myself because I do. Let's be real. But, you recognize that only slows you down. If you don't get something out and you don't start testing things, you're never going to know what's working and what's not working. So when you're thinking about it, like, think about how many companies are automatically defaulting to like a generic version of the truth that they have. So let's use this as an example. We save time and money. Posted about this on LinkedIn the other week because I was literally walking through a mall here and I was walking by a booth, and I won't necessarily say which brand it was. It was Wealth Simple. And they had this big like booth. And it was like, we save time and money. And I was just like, oh my God. It's like one of those stupid inspo posts when you're like, I was walking through the mall and this is what taught me about B2B. But like, it's sure true. Okay. We save time and money. Amazing. True. Great. But it's like, it's not interesting.
It's very basic. Yeah.
It's so basic. And if you look at a page, if you are on a page of somebody's website and it says, we save you time and money, you can put one of like 7 million logos on there.
Exactly.
Like everyone talks about that test, like cover the logo and read it. And then what company is it? And if you can't decipher, then it's bad. And it's like, well, that's most, like not going to lie, most companies probably are in that state right now.
Exactly. And the funniest thing is I did the same test and I did like a whole series on it where I actually tested 5 to 10 companies in cyber where they have mentioned AI powered AI. This is exactly the point that I wanted to say. Everybody's talking about it. Nobody is coming up with something new. I don't think the basics of marketing needs to come up to the surface again so that people understand this is all generic and it's not making sense. And exactly the point that you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's so, I don't know what's happening right now in the world besides AI. And, like I would love to just go back to the simpler times.
Same.
But AI powered, that's a cringe one because it means nothing. So it's like the whole point is like, how do you ask better questions? Saves time and money. Great. Okay. What does that get the customer to do better? What risk goes away? What time does it lock? What were they doing before? What were they comparing you against? What changed after working with you? Like, how does it make them better at what they're doing? And I think a lot of companies, forget too that it's not about making themselves like the company good, the one that they're selling the product. It's like, what is your product doing for that person that you're selling to that makes them look good to their boss, that makes them better at their job, right? And there's like, there's that whole perspective of it that we kind of get caught up like forgetting. And that's where customer language matters, like customer understanding, not just listening to the sales calls recorded in Gong, like different, if you actually spend time having these conversations, it can unlock so much perspective for you. And, it's like sales cards, support tickets, customer interviews, reviews, transcripts, like everything holds useful insights. And all AI is doing is making that generic marketing easier, as you were saying. So in turn, like customer understanding is more valuable in theory, it should be. But there's, I don't know, maybe people are it's easier to just go this way and everybody else is doing and they say they like feel that it's appropriate. I don't know. But long term, it's going to bite people in the butt. There's so many companies out there and everybody's vibe coding their own stuff now. You see, I vibe coded my own CRM and like I vibe coded 2 apps myself on a free lovable day a year ago, but it was actually effing hard, easy. And there was a lot of things I didn't do that I was like, oh, this would be cool to have, because it started opening up a whole can of worms. And I was like, I don't even know what this means. And how do I connect these things? And is this going to cost me money? Right. So
That's so
is my whole spiel on that. But I will say too, like getting hung up on the original question of like the clarity thing in early stage when things are constantly changing. I think it's also important to remember too that like once you set messaging, once you set positioning, like you're not locked into it for life.
Exactly.
And so, you're in early stage something, this is something that I was, recently working on with a client where it's like, okay, we've got this thing. We don't have product market fit yet. We're trying to figure that out. We're trying to understand what our potential customers or our current customers are seeing. What do they trust? What do they not trust? What context do we have? Who is the best type of person? Like all of those things, right? You start with one iteration, one set of messaging, one, look at positioning. And then you start getting actual people in. You start having conversations. You start having webinars where people are asking questions. You start getting more and more and more information. And then that can help make the original piece stronger, right? And, you're not looking at it every month because that's going to make you crazy. But, like 6 months down the line, you say, hey, okay, here's where we were. Here's what we're seeing. Like, what do we maybe need to change? What feels on track? Whatever. Like you can evolve, and it should evolve as a company learns, especially when something is, in the earlier stages of things.
Exactly. And I think I always believe it's always better to keep digging, making it perfect instead of just thinking that this document is perfect, cannot be touched. I've seen companies not even edit their positioning docs for at least 2 quarters. I cannot understand why we cannot go back to the positioning document and at least tweak some of the things that have changed in the market. Like there has to be something. So
I also think too, like to a degree, you see a little bit, like if you think about, for example, ICPs, I feel like there's a little bit of that same thinking in there, like especially in the earlier stages, you come up with one idea, you're like, this person feels right. And then maybe learnings tell you that's not the case. And then people are kind of like weirdly hesitant about going back, or, they're trying to hedge in too hard. It's like, hey, it's okay to be wrong. Probably a lot of people are wrong initially. Like go back now, you've got more data. You were working with less data to start.
Exactly.
How do you start, adjusting based on what you're learning and what you're seeing and all of those things? So yeah, it's an adventure. And then I know you mentioned too about customer stories, and I think those are, interesting as well, because I feel like they often die in the handoff, to say, because like sales has relationship and CS knows the customers and marketing needs the story. And then, often you got legal and approvals getting involved, which is like a whole other wacky adventure of stuff, especially when it's your legal and then they're legal and they're an enterprise customer. And it's like, you're actually not allowed to use their logo and, right? So like, everybody can agree that story matters. Customer stories are amazing. Customer proof is amazing. What better words than the words of your customers, right? And the actual impact it's had. But like if nobody owns that whole path from like raw customer conversation, or even beyond that, like the strategy and the thinking and all of those pieces that become before even getting the raw customer conversation, and like through to the finished usable asset, then like, it's going to just kind of die out.
Exactly. And I think the funny thing about that is everybody, but nobody ends up taking any action because it's a long process of approval.
Very, very long.
And I think there's a meme around this that we ended up posting the customer story. Let's see if our legal team or their legal team has any problems with it. We'll deal with it later. But at least the story is out. So I've met those marketers as well, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make magic happen sometimes too. And I think it's also important too, like a customer story. And even when you think about testimonials too, it's not valuable because like the customer is happy. Nobody
Yeah,
cares. Of course they're
exactly.
happy. That's why they're giving you. It's like valuable because it's showing what changed. And
Yeah,
like there has to be that big call out to what changed and what made them better. And not just like this customer was so delighted with their service, right? Because of course they're
exactly.
going to tell.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that you focus on the customer story part as well, because many marketers do end up getting lost into, all of it, all the messiness of positioning, messaging, and all of it. But I think the whole focus on the customer story is to actually build more trust and credibility into the space that you're actually marketing it to. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that we always have to come back to, even if you're feeling lost, even if positioning is not making sense. I think for me as a product marketer, what I come back to always is customer feedback, customer questions, customer queries, even from
Mhm.
all of the data that I can get from the sales team. So that
Yeah.
is super important.
I feel like any good marketer is always going to have that in the back of their mind, whether they're like life cycle or, product marketing, or if they are customer marketing or, whatever world they're in, paid performance, like all of that should be important to everybody,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Yes, absolutely. So I want to move on to this question, which I really wanted to ask you is across all of it, the launches, repositioning, the unstuck projects, what has been the single most rewarding thing in your career? And I'm not talking about the most impressive on paper, but something that actually felt good to you.
yeah, I think I kind of called this out a little bit earlier when I was talking about like things that I liked in past roles and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, the most rewarding part has been helping people get unstuck. Like the moment where a team has all these pieces floating around or like all this lack of clarity, and then suddenly you can name what's actually happening and then also what needs to happen next. Like, it's usually probably not going to be like a flashy project or a big launch or something, but it's like a moment of relief where something becomes clear where it wasn't before. So I don't know. I was also saying this earlier too, but like I've always been a person that will say things like that need to be said. So hopefully in a useful way, obviously. And
Yeah.
I was very, as a side note, I was very noted for my radical candor in a past role. So that, has always carried with me. I take that as a good thing. People are always like, how are you? I'm always so interested. Like, you have no problem like speaking your mind and whatever. And it's like, I don't know. I just naturally can't. I guess I've gone past the point where I care a lot about what other people think. And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
always trying to be good. Like, I'm not doing it from a point of harm, right? I'm doing it from
Right.
point of like, I want to know what you're thinking and understand more. So it's not like being blunt for the sake of being blunt, but I'm like, I'm trying to get to the useful truth faster. There's a time and a place for like going off topic, and I'm all for the tangents and stuff, right? But sometimes you need to just get to the useful truth faster. So, and I think too, like since working for myself, I honestly think that's become even clearer. Like,
Exactly.
in my brain, I care more about fit now
Mhm.
than I did. I'm still, figuring things out in a way, but I have more clarity for myself where I'm like, okay, is this a problem where my brain actually feels useful? And can I make this work sharper? Can I make it clear? Can I make it more usable? And that to me feels way more usable than being just inside some big machine all the time.
Exactly. And I want to quote you on that, because if we ever do a part two of Behind the Brief, I would literally love to talk about the non marketing side of Maylee, because there's so many people that I keep getting questions from how to take some space in marketing, in tech, because it's already very male dominated. Right. So maybe in part two, if you ever agree on it, I would love to discuss how you actually built that side of yourself where you are not afraid of saying no. And
Mhm.
like, I'm sure like there was a time where you must have been the yes person, right? You were always saying
Of
yes. You
course.
were always,
You
being
always
there.
start a career being the yes person.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I would love to explore that side of you as well. And I'm sure there are many, many people, especially women listening to us today, would want to hear that side of the story as well, because many of us struggle with being firm, assertive about what
Mhm.
we think and what we should say out loud. And not at the cost of our careers, of course, but at the cost of our self respect, or, just maintaining that level of self-respect for our own self in the workspace. So I think that is something I would love to explore.
Yeah, I've got lots of stories. Like I was working somewhere, I was the only female on like the director-ish level team and whatever. And that was a whole adventure. There was some weird stuff that happened there. So yeah, definitely happy to talk about that.
Moving on to just the last fun part of this episode, I want some of your quick fun takes and very strong opinions so we can keep it very short, very crisp. So, one of this is, what would be that one marketing phrase you would permanently retire from?
I already talked about this. It would be right now we save time and money. Because, I mean, AI powered is up there now that you've mentioned that in this conversation, because that also grinds my gears.
Yeah.
But I don't know, just save time and money right now. It's like the one thing that's in the back of my head. And I'm just like, it's not like, it is just the least interesting version of the truth.
And I think all the marketers, even I am guilty of using that in one of the campaigns.
Because usually, like, I feel like usually someone's just like, it's fine, roll with it. And then you're like, okay, but I don't know. I feel like I've got more questions about what this actually means. Like I have time and money. And I'm just sitting in the corner like, is it weird that I have more questions about what that is? Like I'm going to choose where to challenge, but
No, love that. At least add one number to it to just think.
Yeah, how much time? How much money?
Okay, moving on to the second one is the half-built thing that you see stranded on teams more than anything other.
My answer for the half-built thing would be customer proof, which we again touched on earlier on. But that's another thing that I've seen a lot lately is like people want more case studies, they want more testimonials, they want voice of customer, they want sales proof, they want like all of that stuff. But then, as I said earlier, like all that stuff sits half-built or not used properly or whatever it is, because nobody is actually owning that whole carry through from like the beginning part through to like the finished usable asset.
Right. Interesting. I love that. And thank you so much for being so quick and punchy about it. Maylee, this was so good. And thank you so much for being so raw and candid about all of my questions. So I think a lot of people listening are going to recognize their own team in what you have described. The half-built thing, the clarity problem hiding behind a capacity problem. And the way you talk about senior work that just gets done without becoming another thing to manage is genuinely something people listening to today are going to take away with. So if you are a B2B or a SaaS team that needs the thinking and the doing, you need to go find Maylee at mayleejacob.com. I'll drop Maylee's LinkedIn in the show notes. So thank you so much, Maylee, for spending time here on Behind the Brief.
Yeah, it was fun to be here. Thanks for having me. Yay!